My name is Casey Ryan. I'm the Director of Operations here at 10th Magnitude. Been here for about 2 years. 10th Magnitude is a consulting company focused exclusively on Azure in Chicago, but we have offices in Dallas, Seattle, New York, and Tulsa. We have a startup group of people who've just suddenly moved to Colorado, and so now we have a Colorado pseudo office there. Highly virtualized culture. I think it used to be called the Azure and Microsoft Technology Group. Really was started by a few people in 10th Magnitude a really long time ago. It kind of died off as we all got busy and as such. We wanted to re-kick it, so this is the first meeting. We rebranded as we usually do. I don't know where CLAM came from, but we were trying to be unique because there's a number of Azure meetup groups in and around Chicago now. So we're trying to take a different tact of being convenient for you guys to hit on your way home, not taking ourselves seriously with the memes and calling ourselves CLAM, which is the Chicago Loop Azure Meetup Team or group. And we're trying to bring you stuff on regular intervals. So our aim is monthly, and we've already posted, and as we follow through with that and kind of attribute to that, we have our next 3 meetups scheduled, and those are now out on the meetup page. I think our next one is around Databricks in Azure. Super interesting. After that, we have a special one around B2C and Active Directory integration with applications. One of our 10th Magnitude guys is like a super expert in that. So he's going to be on town at the B2C conference doing that. Follow that, we'll do one in July with a topic that is yet undecided. It's not, I want to make clear, it's not 10th Magnitude only that can or should be presenting at the Chicago Loop Azure Meetup. We just tapped internal people to get the ball rolling, and we hope to have a wealth of people from across the loop all presenting. So if anybody has a topic, I'm particularly interested in, and I can be very helpful in fostering that and helping you come up to speed, or helping you put together something. Doesn't have to be formal, it can be very informal. I'm up for all sorts of different presentations, really, because I think they're all helpful. Part of this is networking and just getting to meet each other. The other part is seeing cool shit that other people are doing. So with that, hand it over to John Wilds, DCT architect data center transformation architect inside of, and consultant inside of 10th Magnitude.
Thanks, Casey. Yeah, so like Casey said, I'm John Wilds, and this is our first meetup, and now I've just broken my PowerPoint. Look at that. Okay. Like Casey said, we're just trying to get people, we're targeting Chicago Loop, right? There's a lot of companies in the area here. Not that we don't want people coming from the suburbs out to the Chicago Loop meetup, but it's always going to be here somewhere in the loop so that people from the area can walk here, hit the train on the way home. And we want to, while we're running it at 10th Magnitude, one of the things that we don't want to do is sell anything here. So I'm not even using a 10th Magnitude branded slides. It's really just stuff that we've distilled. I spent almost 10 years working with Azure in some form or other. If you've known, back in 2008, 2009 when it first started, it was nothing but upload a ASP.NET packages and let them run up in the cloud. And when I asked my Microsoft rep, I'm like, hey, it would really be cool if I could run like a VM in the cloud. He's like, nah, man, this Azure thing's just going to die out. It's not really going to go that way. That's what we got System Center and all that other stuff for. And that guy's no longer working at Microsoft. So, I saw it way back then. It was really awesome, and it caught wind. Started growing. Competing with AWS. So I've done a bunch of that, and really a lot of these learnings. I don't like creating slide presentations. Mine just basically have a bunch of text, simply because I want to convey and take questions. So a lot of the content I've distilled from the internet, mostly Ignite sessions, and a lot of it you can find that this information is not new. Like the 5 Rs that Gartner put out came out in 2011. right? 2011, that's ancient time in terms of the cloud. I mean, that's so long ago, but they're still relevant today when you think about what is migrating to the cloud. We're just now getting people who are getting more comfortable with it. They're not so much afraid of it anymore. They're starting to treat it like a data center. So that's what we're going to talk about today. We're going to go through a bunch of that stuff. I myself have been doing IT for almost 20 years. I've had kind of a parallel career in the United States Navy. I'm also still a reservist, so I do that. IT and the government, the things that I've seen makes you wonder, when you hear the JEDI package that they're fighting over now for the $10 billion for the cloud for the DoD, it's sorely needed, but I don't even know if they're going to know what to do with that when somebody awards that contract. So I've done some of that. I've worked at a bunch of companies in the Chicagoland area, all of Chicago. I've worked at Aon. I've been at United Airlines, where if you still fly United Airlines, the touchscreen kiosks, the base image, my team deployed that. So all of those, you see the flight information displays, when they all air out, you see the backgrounds, the way it's all set up. My team did that. They haven't really changed a whole lot of it except the front end, so it's pretty cool. And then I worked at Microsoft for a few years, did the pre-sales thing there, in the on-prem data center stuff, and then landed up over here doing more engineering, got out of the pre-sales game, and started doing more delivery, which is where I find I have a lot of fun. So if you want to, we'll share these slides after the meeting. My contact information is up there. Feel free to hit me up, questions or whatever. So when we talk about migrations and what people are driving towards and what was causing these migrations, it's a wide swath of different things, right? Most often we see it's a desire to get out of a data center. Some of the most migrations that I've been on recently are they're at colo spaces, and we're just running Windows servers in a colo and we're paying a buttload, and it's a pain. It's a pain. I want to get out. So that's really what we see. But there's a whole lot of different things of why people want to do that. Being able to bring new things in, new companies in, integrate things quickly there. Compliance is a big deal. When I hear people talk about, well, my data center is super XYZ compliant. Oh, well, show me the check sheets and all the stuff that you've done with it. How often have you done that? Oh, well, this is this is 2 or 3 years ago, and the guy that did that job burned himself out and he left. There's usually one guy in charge of that in some of these large organizations. And so you find this, these people looking at the way compliance is done in their environment, and it's out of date, or it's not quite, as up to par as you'd like it to be. Whereas with Azure, if you go to the Trust Center, you can see how often they do their certifications, how often they've gone through stuff like that. And basically by moving into the cloud, you get 98% of what you need from a compliance standpoint just by being in that environment. There's a few wickets you got to check, but largely that reduces your scope of responsibility and risk at the same time. So compliance is a big one. Obviously, innovation in terms of wanting to move faster. I mean, you do real estate, .NET development, right? As a developer, you don't really particularly care where your app runs, right? Exactly. As long as it runs on my machine. And in the cloud. So that's another big reason. We also see that IT is changing, right? I've been in IT long enough here in Chicago that I was pulling 10base2 cables and running NetWare and stuff, setting all that sort of stuff up. And IT people get very siloed. I've always wanted to do everything. So I've never really spent too much time doing one particular skill set. But I've met storage guys and network guys and telco guys, and none of them want to leave their tower. And the processes that bring all those people together are just humongous. ITIL's developed around that. It's just not moving fast enough. Big airline down the street, right? You can't adapt to change on a merger if all of your processes are. We hearing okay? You're fine. Easiest way. Good. Okay. All right, so you can't adapt quickly. So we're throwing this term DevOps and IT now, right? IT, you shouldn't care what your infrastructure looks like. You have code, I have infrastructure. We marry them together at release time, and it works. And we iterate faster. The agileness of infrastructure is really taking software-defined data centers. That's just the way of the future. So Gartner has come up with this. 5 different strategies that were, released in 2011, right? And this is Microsoft's take on it. And when I did a search for this to try to actually get that Gartner document, see if somebody actually posted it, or I could download it for free to read exactly what it is, no one has that posted. But they all have their own take on these 5 R's. And what you'll find is that they kind of match this, right? Rehost, refactor, re-architect, rebuild, and then 2 more, retire and replace, right? replace being a software as a service thing, and retire means get it out. And that's really certainly an option. But when people think migration, they think, I just got to take everything to the cloud. And the first thing I tell my customers is, do you have to? Do you really need this anymore? I mean, if I turn the server off tomorrow, is anybody going to complain about it? Well, not really. Okay, well then let's not take it to the cloud. Let's just turn it off. Those are always options there. So tonight we're really going to kind of focus on is most of the rehosting, and simply because that's where the lowest entry point into Azure is. It's about moving lift and shift, or lift, tinker, and shift is what some people would call that, by taking your IaaS environments and replicating them to the cloud. Then we'll have some slides on optimize and secure and manage. We'll just talk briefly on some things like Azure blueprints and policies and stuff, how you can govern your cloud. Because like anything, if you can't control it, once you give people access to it, then you just, you have problems. I mean, who manages the SharePoint farm here? Right? I mean, SharePoint, biggest, okay, that's good, nobody in here. SharePoint, oh my God. What an awful thing. This is another take on the same refactor, rehost, reintegration type stuff, but it comes from the other cloud company and their strategy. And we talk about, I like the map. I couldn't find the map. So again, I'm just borrowing content I find from the internet. The principles still kind of apply. You have two different paths. We rehost, we lift, tinker, and shift, or refactor, we rewrite things so that we actually are more cloud-like in the environment. Because the idea is if you're not leveling up your organization, if you're not leveling up your people, you're really just bringing the old problems from one data center to a software-defined data center. And that's going to be extremely more expensive than, adopting a mentality of, hey, I can turn machines off at night. I can do that because I have load balancers and availability sets that will handle directing traffic where they're supposed to be. So if I want to have, two machines on in Europe that are hosting the traffic during Europe time, one machine on in America, and then flip it so I have two machines on in America and one on in Europe, I'm saving costs there, or find out that I can just be dependent on the 99.95% SLA from a premium-backed IaaS disk in Azure, that I don't need to have two virtual machines. So trusting that those SLAs, and then holding Microsoft to say, hey, I want my money back if it doesn't happen. And that's the other part of it. So yeah, two paths: rehosting, refactoring, and then kind of in the middle, where we think about, well, I'm going to re-platform my IaaS web apps and just putting them in app services, right? I'm not going to change any code, but I'm not going to run the virtual machine anymore. I can actually just put that in a web app service, or I'm going to get rid of it and see if I can't find some newer version of software. A lot of people take this path when they have to get rid of, Server 2003. Who still runs Server 2003 in their environment? Yeah, it's okay. We're among friends here. I'm pretty sure someone's got one somewhere. Microsoft actually will let you run that in Azure instead of charging you a massive custom support agreement license fee, but you have to have it in Azure. Same with 2008 R2, and those end of life are coming up this year for SQL and next year for 2008 Windows. But again, looking at repurchasing and changing, the infrastructure that you're running it on newer software, running on a newer operating systems, and that sort of stuff. So some of the tools that we have in these four pillars of assessing, migrating, optimizing, and securing and managing your environment, we're not going to dig deep into it, but if you look at some of the tools, this is what Microsoft has. There's a huge breadth of things here. We're not going to kind of categorize the rest of the content around this. We'll probably spend more time talking about Azure Migrate, which is their new tool, which does automated assessments of your environment. It looks for compatibility with Azure, how long it runs. It looks at the VMs and says, hey, this is an F2S VS with premium disk to get this kind of performance over a certain period of time. It will right size things for you, and then allows you to group them and provide nice graphs and charts and stuff to the CIO and say, hey, this is how much money we're going to save, how much money it's actually going to cost you to move there. I've stopped telling people that you can save money by moving to the cloud simply because you can, but it's not always true. But what you gain in terms of efficiency, not having to manage your own data center, you have to get rid of that stuff. It's not like keeping it running on-prem is going to save you any money. So get rid of the things that you have on-prem, get them out. So Azure Migrate we're going to talk about. There's other tools, the database migration assistance. So basically you can take all of your databases in MySQL, Postgres, Maria, all those, you name it. There's an integration component from Microsoft that will suck that into a PaaS service or into an IaaS virtual machine. The actual tools to do the migration, Azure Site Recovery is the back-end tool. Several years ago, they bought a company called InMage and turned that into Azure Site Recovery. How many of you run VMware in your environments? You got VMware, okay. How many run HyperV? More HyperV? Oh, wow, damn. I don't see a lot of HyperV. I get excited when I see HyperV only because I'm a Microsoft guy, but HyperV migration, we'll touch a bit on those as well with Azure Site Recovery. Azure Data Box. How many of you have 100 terabytes of storage on-prem? Pictures?
That's the one part we've already moved. Because of the scalability. It was like, we need to.
Right.
And then all of a sudden, it was like a limit of 10 photos. Now it's like 40 per, and then the resolutions went up, and all of a sudden, in a 2-year span, we went to like 10-fold amount of data.
Yeah. So. Good thing you moved to the cloud then.
Yes.
Where do you host it now?
It's in blob storage.
On Azure?
On Azure.
Oh, okay, cool. Yeah. Awesome. Good deal. So DataBox, right? DataBox is a tool basically, used to call it Azure Import Export. Basically you could order some disks from Microsoft, BitLocker keys, put them in your data center, copy the data, BitLocker send them back, they'd import them into Azure. They've got multiple sizes. You can get the little pocket SSD for up to 10 terabytes, I think, and then a NAS device, and then the Coffin device, massive data box, petabytes in size. And then they have what are edge computing devices, which are actually large amounts of data. You can actually still put in your data center. Because not everything has to go to Azure, but if you have some proprietary, some sensitive data, I did a bunch of stuff with the government, right? So the fact that there's now an Azure secret, and the only thing they'll say is that there's an Azure secret, they won't tell you where it's at. That kind of workload. I can tell you for a fact that on an unclassed side, the CIA does stuff like that all the time. That's what the big push from Amazon was, getting them devices that can do their compute on the end and send the data to their Amazon cloud. Microsoft does the exact same thing through DataBox. Cost management, again, seeing how much it's going to cost you to run your environment. So they purchased, again, another add-on company called CloudIn. They've now integrated into your portal. You can see how much things cost, forecast that, and then actually break it down by resources and different areas. You can see who's actually spending money and who's wasting it, right? Who's using it wisely and who's not. And then the secure managed part, again, that's a lot of the stuff that's built in. If you've had any time to play with Azure, Azure Security Manager, Azure Blueprints, Azure Policy, all these things that kind of help keep the environment in check and let you know what's going on out of the box. Sometimes free, like Blueprints and Policy are free, but Security Center has a free tier, all without agents, right? Basically looking at your environment from a host perspective, and every IaaS virtual machine you have currently has an Azure agent in it, so there's something reporting at least to the infrastructure, let you know what's going on. So tools there, but there's so much. And actually, I wiped out the ISVs at the bottom, but you can find a lot of partners, right? You can find Zerto, Cloudemize, Mover. They're all doing a lot of things to help you assess and migrate and get to the cloud. So when we get into the actual migrating to Azure, right? I've been in these projects where we think we know everything, and then we go to the migrate and we don't, right? We migrate something and, oh yeah, well, someone didn't document this or didn't have it there. So this used to be 7 Ps because of the chief that I grew up with, because he liked the number 7. It's the pay grade he was on, but it's proper planning prevents poor performance, the 5 Ps. So working through a process to ensure that you know what you do beforehand should take probably twice as long as the actual migration. I'm going to say it's take more time, and that's true for just about every project. Problem is once we get this velocity, people think the cloud moves fast. You really have to hold everybody up so you can prime that pump, get it all set up, and then let it go. Because if you let it go wrong, it all goes wrong, and people hate the cloud, and it runs really slow, and all sorts of stuff. So we'll talk about some of those things in this. So breaking out what Microsoft has, we have our on-prem infrastructure. We have apps, we have data, we have VMs, and the key things for migrating and monitorization, we're going to just basically focus on rehosting, discovering where we're at, and prioritizing that stuff, and picking the right workloads at the right time to move. So one of the tools that we use to do that is Azure Migrate. And Azure Migrate, I wanted to have a demo today. Again, I didn't properly plan for this because I have a HyperV environment at home. Everybody said HyperV assessments were available. It's not. still GA. VMware is the largest part of the environment there. But essentially how Azure Migrate works is you have your on-prem VMware infrastructure and you download an appliance. So if you had experience with Azure Site Recovery before, you get a separate virtual machine to do the Azure Migrate piece of that. Once we've downloaded this appliance, we connect it to vCenter. It starts queuing a bunch of data without an agent. So I can go in here, I can scan all of my virtual machines. It looks at vCenter, pulls all that data out of the vCenter database and sends it to the cloud, right? It sends it up over HTTPS, right? No special ports, no special firewall requests from anybody. You can do this completely as shadow IT if you really wanted to, as long as you can stand up a virtual machine somewhere. Once it sends it to the cloud, it creates a nice, allows you to create reports. It basically lumps all of the data up inside of that and gives you the ability to then group your virtual machines. Once you have that, you can then kick it over to Azure Site Recovery and push out the migration agents to start doing that work. The key thing with this is that it's free. It doesn't cost you any money. You don't have to have a consultant come in and do it for you. And you can get an assessment of your environment without a whole lot of drama. Like you can actually go stand up a subscription, free trial for 30 days, book this in here. It'll actually suck up all the data into the cloud and actually will deploy a tool called the Service Map tool, which gives you the ability to see how virtual machines and applications are connected. Now you pay for this as a monitoring service once your machine is in Azure, but as a part of the migration service, you have to install an agent. There's a piece to do that, but it will scan your entire environment, look at all the open ports, look at all the processes and see how they connect. And it'll give you this deep, rich visualization of what that looks like. Because when I manage a data center and we didn't know what a server did, the joke was, let's just go turn it off. Right? No one's been down here to touch it. It's all dusty. Let's just turn it off and see who complains, right? That's the bad way to do it. Or we didn't know how many servers we are because, hey, we want to migrate some things and all of a sudden, hey, this one piece broke. I got these batch files in some other spot that is running some process at night and now that's all broken. And that's critical because it goes to, the Office of Foreign Asset Control. Well, thanks. Why didn't you tell anybody about that, right? This will discover those things and highlight it because this alone will save your bacon in any of these migration tools because it allows you to pick those that are easy to get at the easy wins and build the confidence and then tackle the harder ones later. So the assessments give you the ability to look at, how much they're going to cost you, how fast they're running. The idea is that you don't want to have virtual machines like on-prem. You can have a 4 vCPU, 16 gigabyte RAM VM running at 2% all the time. That's a complete waste of virtual machine space because of the compression. That people think that works well, but you don't want to do that in Azure because there's no compression, there's no forced migration off of hosts when things get busy, that sort of stuff to provide those resources. You want to right size it so that your virtual machines run just as hot as you feel comfortable letting them run up, because that is where you get the most bang for your buck. Any unutilized CPU time is just a waste of money, right? You're spending more money on that. It also allows you to actually look at things if you don't know your Microsoft licensing agreement. It's a good time to actually get involved with your Microsoft rep and say, hey, I just paid you a bunch of money at my EA for all these Windows 2019 server licenses I haven't deployed yet. Do I get any discount in Azure? Oh, sure you do. I got to buy 100 virtual machines. I want to move to the cloud. I can pay essentially compute rates, no Windows licensing rate for those virtual machines. So again, you save on the Azure cost because you've already upfronted what you paid for in Windows. You don't lose that. So that's what the hybrid use benefit is, and that'll tell you what you can do, which servers support that. There's also a calculator. We're not going to dig into that, but this will help you, run those numbers to tell management what it is that this is going to cost us and how long it's going to take us to recoup, and then help them make the decisions to turn things off on-prem. So once we've done some of that, we want to take and look at, how are we going to plan to migrate these servers so that we have availability. So these are some of the options that we have inside of Azure. Depending on how you run your virtual machine, if you run your virtual machine with premium storage, a single VM will give you 99.9. I forget, I should know what these numbers are, but it translates into a few hours of downtime a year, right? And the further you go, you translate into minutes. I think 99.99% is like 36 minutes a month in terms of outage. And that's where you set these things up. And we're not going to dig into the architecture of Azure. If anybody wants that, We could probably fill out the survey that we posted in the meetup and say, hey, I would really love to have just an overview of Azure. I didn't take that poll at the beginning, so if I'm over your head, you can feel free to stop me. We good? Okay. Some of the things that they do have recently added. Again, we talked about Azure hybrid benefits, some of the offers that are there, support for different regions. I don't know if that applies to anybody here in the room, but Azure China and Azure government are actually run by, well, China is run by a Chinese government, and then, or 21 VNet or whatever that is. And Germany is run by a third party. It's not run by Microsoft due to regulations. So those regions are separate for that. If you need to run there. There was a tool, or there still is a tool called the Deployment Planner, and this is an Excel macro-based workbook that you can run on a virtual machine and let it, query overnight. It's a set of PowerShell scripts that essentially still goes out to VMware, does some querying there. You let it run for several days, and then it goes back with this nice chart of what it's going to take to migrate your VM to the cloud, right? In terms of if I'm just providing, Azure's going to be my disaster recovery environment. It's not going to be my primary environment. What kind of bandwidth do I need to sustain a particular RTO and RPO? If you're using it just for migration purposes, looking at that is going to tell you essentially how many cores you're going to need, how long it'll take to replicate stuff up there, what that cost is going to be. And then it highlights some compatibility problems, not all of them. And that's where, the proper planning comes in, where we want to look at all the VMs that are in this list and then compare them to the Azure support matrices for ASR. Not necessarily Azure, but ASR, because there unfortunately is some discrepancies in that and how that works. The last project we ran into, Azure supports SLES 12, right? But it lets you build your virtual machine however you want to from the marketplace image in Azure. You can use the ext2 file systems. You can use file systems that are non-journaling to run databases, all sorts of stuff. But if you want to migrate that with ASR, you can't. You have to have a journaling file system in Linux to migrate it because of how they do their block copies. And unfortunately, that will prevent you from migrating. So that was highlighted. It wasn't highlighted on this report. Every virtual machine came up and said, good to go. Everything had the correct version of Linux. That's what we scanned on. We sent it, and then it was failing again and again and again. And we find this one file system, and it won't take it, but the agent won't tell you. And it's kind of this black hole. So always double check what the support agreements or support documents state, and then hope that Microsoft will, figure out some way to support that at some point in time, or figure out a way. I mean, you can convert a file system. I'm not going to dig into that, but the customer's like, why? I like this the way it is. I don't want to change it. And they really shouldn't have to. So rehosting. So HyperV migration. This is quick and dirty. If I got a bunch of HyperV hosts on-prem, all I'm going to do is make sure that 443 is open. I'm going to download the Microsoft Azure Recovery Services agent, and I'm going to install it on every HyperV host that I have. Okay. If I have System Center Virtual Machine Manager, there's a little bit of a tool for that, but it's essentially the same process. There's nothing else that I have to do. I can pick every virtual machine once I've set that up, connect it to my Azure Site Recovery Vault, and I pick virtual machines to start replicating. There's no server in the middle. There's an inbox replication tool. It's been developed with Hyper-V, and because Azure is essentially a Hyper-V underneath it, the process is, that's all that you need to do for that. Super simple, really easy to work on. Not a whole lot of drama. Any questions there? All right, so VMware migration works slightly different, right? Again, we wait to make sure that 443 is open, but we install a couple of pieces of software on-prem. Now it's been turned, used to be there were 2 different servers you had to install. Now it's just one appliance you can download called the Microsoft Azure Site Recovery Unified Installer, right? I can take it and install it on the virtual machine. It's going to put a process server and a configuration server in there, and depending on the size of your environment, if you're migrating thousands or protecting thousands of virtual machines, you're probably going to have more than one process server, right? Process servers essentially are the ones that do all the block-to-block replication, putting it in the cache and sending it to the cloud. And so for redundancy and resiliency and just being able to support that, thousands of virtual machines, you probably need more than one of those. But essentially, we put that on your environment. You can actually do this for Amazon Web Services. So if you had Amazon IaaS environments, there's a support statement around that. You basically build a virtual machine with the ASR components inside it. It will put an agent on every single machine you're going to replicate to the cloud. And at that point, it's going to take a block by block inside the virtual machine copy of that VM, synchronize it to Azure, put it in a storage account. When it finally matches, then it just sends the change bit that goes over. So if you have a server that has a lot of churn, like a database server, you're probably going to need larger processing servers, larger caches to store that stuff before it makes it to the cloud, and the requisite pipe to do that sort of thing. That will all be discovered when you do the assessments. But this is essentially how it works. I can pick the servers, and then it migrates them or replicates them one by one, and I can work through this failover process, which we'll talk about later. The unified installer is routinely updated. They focus more on supporting VMware as rapidly as they can. I've lost track of what version I think we're at right now with VMware 6.7. I think that's the most recent. But they continually update that to support all of these versions of the operating system and stuff there, and as well as some new the platform stuff like managed disks. It used to be you had to stand up your own VHD blobs and connect them to VMs. Now you don't have to worry about that anymore. Managed disks are kind of a nice functionality. You can move right into that side of Azure. All right. And once we're done, we want to make sure that our environment covers some of these pillars, right? You can go and have a proof of concept environment where you don't do this stuff, but if you're migrating to production, these are the other pillars of things that you're going to want to look at in your planning process before you even start with migrating or replicating the virtual machines. You're going to want to plan out, how many subscriptions you're going to need, what that structure is going to look like, all sorts of governance from that, and really develop a cloud engineering team. We have some documents on that I can share with you on just those roles. You see that this kind of mushrooms into just more than migrations, right? Moving to the cloud, it's really about just proper planning. The active migration is so boring, you could script it really once you get to the point where you're done with that. So digging into some of the lessons learned about what we've had here in Azure is always plan. I'm not going to hit that anymore, but spend time. If you're like a planning guru and you like Agile and you can create boards, just break down tasks for things that need done, do that. Uncover all of the dependencies before you even start migrating. You'll save yourself a ton of time beforehand, or in the after you start doing that. Let's determine what we're going to do from governing Azure at the highest level. Now, you don't have to fill out naming conventions really, although that works. But really the general structure, who's going to pay for Azure? How's it going to work in your environment? Do I need to have multiple subscriptions? Am I going to have things like management groups? Is it all going to go in one subscription? Which region are we going to use, right? All these things are questions you're going to want to answer. And you may have to go through this depending on how you break it out. If you attack your business from a business unit standpoint, or based on an application standpoint, or a geographic standpoint, you may have to answer these questions again and again. But start here and move down. Think about Azure as a data center. Don't think about as the cloud. You're to the point now where, yes, it's virtualized environment, yes, it's software defined, but treat it like a data center. How would I do this? How would I go and move into Equinix? How would I go and build my own data center? What are the kinds of things I would ask? What kind of questions I would have? Some of those you can dismiss, some of those you can't. How am I going to plan my network out? What am I going to do for that? How am I going to get into that network? What are the security devices I'm going to need there? Can I use NSGs? Do I need NVAs? All that sort of stuff. Plan that stuff out first, treat it like a regular data center. Then start doing your assessment. Once you've planned it out and you've got it on paper or on Visio or on a whiteboard in a picture, start doing the assessment. Once you've done the assessment, take that, break it down into small pieces, and then we like to run into this test, migrate, validate, repeat cycle, right? Once I've done all this part of it, I can start looking at this. I've got groups, I'm just gonna test this one group, and I'm gonna hand it out to the engineering team or multiple engineering teams. Then I'm gonna migrate it. Once I've tested it, I've gone through things like a test failover. I've gone through bringing my users in. They're gonna have a script that they're gonna test. When I asked the customer, when they wanted to bring an application, and said, hey, we want to bring this app to Azure because it's running really, really slow on premise. I said, well, do you have any metrics that tells me what really, really slow means? Well, not really. That's okay. Well, let's do this. Let's just use your system as is and tell me what's the first 2 or 3 things that take a long time. And just run through those, and we'll sit here with a stopwatch, and we'll take them, and we'll write these down. Very just slow method. And we wrote a Word document, so it takes 45 seconds to walk through these 3 steps, right? It should take no more than 45 seconds. Once we run through these steps, we move it to the cloud. If it does, we need to check for some variance. And we allowed for maybe a second or two in that regard. But when we ended up moving it to the cloud, it was like 15 seconds. So they were super happy at that point, but they didn't know. They couldn't quantify it. So walk through your users and have them quantify that stuff. Then we validate that, and then we repeat. Nice picture for that one. So for the identify phase, actually, we'll back this up. We start at the top. We identify everything that we had. This is all the planning. We want to gather the stakeholders. So find those people in your organization that are outside of IT if you work in centralized IT. That's the assumption for this. Go to them and say, hey, do you know about your application? Who is your genius? Who's the guy that keeps it running for you? Right? Get those people on board. Hey, we're going to move to the cloud, get them together and get them in a meeting and say, I need all of the work that you've done on this stuff, no matter how old it is, because we just want to assess it. Then start creating a list if one doesn't already exist in your environment, right? Some of the projects we get dumped into, this doesn't happen. Night and day difference between 2 customers. One, they brought us in and they said, you know, we do everything in AWS right now, but we're really unsure about Azure. And then they showed us a bunch of stuff, and I'm like, why do you even have me here? Okay, I mean, you guys, you get it. And I don't know if they just wanted me to validate for them that they understood it, but they literally were light years ahead of where any of these other organizations that call me for the same job and say, tell me what to do with Azure, because I don't know. The other company was like, I think Steve knows about this. Yeah, we'll get Steve on the call. And we started putting together, I got this spreadsheet and everything. You look at names, you start running through the stuff. And it's like, yeah, I've been here like 25 years and, 4 office moves and the 3 cabinets in the back, we put stuff in there. I got like 400 virtual machines now. So this guy knows everything. So he's the bus factor of 1, and we want to kind of protect him for that project. So get those people together, write it all out, find out who's important in terms of RACI, if you use that as bringing people in so they identify what's going on. And know that you're going to uncover a bunch of stuff, like lots of garbage. You're going to find lots of stuff out there if you're not on top of things. Just be prepared for that. I want to say don't let end of life drive the migration strategies, but sometimes that's the only thing that's pushing people. So if you feel technically comfortable with that, use end of life as the thing that nudges people over the edge, even to turn it off or buy new or get you to the cloud. But don't always lead with that. When I look at you and you want to go into your organization and be an Azure Avenger and migrate your stuff to the cloud, find the easy wins first. And if the end of life is an easy win, do that. But also don't be afraid of saying, hey, you should probably just get rid of this. What do we use it for? Right? Is it something that we really want to bring to the cloud? And now you see a number cost on it because this virtual machine or this physical server has been running for years down here in the data center, but you don't see that cost. And as soon as you put it in Azure, you start generating a $400 a month virtual machine cost, something that nobody's using. Well, Bean comes and be like, yeah, get rid of that, turn that right off. So it should be the same decision on prem. Next, the assessment tool. This is the key phase here for most organizations. Azure Migrate's the free, easy one, but there are other tools out there depending on what you want to do. Zerto, I started kicking the tires on that simply because their assessment and migration tool is all unified. And Microsoft's isn't at this point. Now, if you can deal with that, that's fine. They're trying to bring it together. And then once you've assessed them, look out things that you have that show up on their, I only get the virtual machine name, or I only get the operating system version, I don't get anything else. Manually go out and pick those systems, designated teams so that you can have visibility into what those are, because you want to know what those are before you start migrating them. So the assessment will catch 95% of everything at a high level. There's going to be a very few, at least I've seen very few in my environment, that I'd actually go out and poke at and look and see what's there to determine that stuff. Grouping. So what I start to do is I just start looking at them as, what's my high confidence and success in migrating to the cloud? What are my easy wins? And put them on the schedule right away for testing. This assumes I've done all the pre-work and got my dev test environments and my subscriptions laid out. But I find these that have a high confidence of migrating and start testing them immediately. Then I start looking at those that have a high confidence of refactoring, where I look at things like, I'm just going to run an IIS server in the cloud, right? Move that off to another team, let them handle it because it's different than the lift and shift, but get it out of your queue and get the right team working on it. Looking at those easy wins, so suppose you're already running Docker containers on-prem, shouldn't be hard to move that to the cloud.
Right.
Even if you're not, there are ways that will, abstract that stuff. If I'm right, talking about containers, you could probably move some workloads on virtual machines into containers. So that's part of the refactoring. Then I start looking at medium confidence. Those are the things that have some unknowns. They may be more, I guess, like sacred cow type systems in your environment where people are like, yeah, we really aren't too comfortable with that just yet. It might be that you have some compliance concerns with that. They might be virtual and physical. So I've got some high-end database backend, but some virtual front ends. That might not be an easy one to migrate. So you're gonna have to look at more of that. The low confidence ones, put them on the bottom until you start getting some wins. Those are the ones that have, software that is still heavily used, but the guy died like 30 years ago and you still need to run it. That kind of stuff. That's not gonna be a high confidence to the cloud. And then there's the last one that says, get out. I don't want you anymore. This is the retire. Get them out of here. Testing. So we grouped every environment. Then we look at how we want to do our testing. In some groups, that's setting up a special subscription for that. Just know that in Azure, if you do special, separate subscriptions for dev test, there are some additional configuration you have to do to connect it to a VNet or set it up, but it's completely isolated. So if I've tested it and it works okay, and I've got my ARM template or however I want to deploy this written down, I can blow it away and just push it into production environment. If you replicate this though, and you replicate and do test failover, you're going to lose that replication. You're going to start over again. Not so much so with resource groups, but some people don't like to see resource groups, so they get really cluttered up if I see a bunch of dev test stuff. Just, it's how you want to do it. You can do it either way. But be sure though that you build out the test environment that mirrors the production environment. So if you have some common core services that you don't want fudged during testing, well, replicate them. If you've got a domain controller, you've got a special database server, some identity management thing, that's all key core common services, create a copy of them and turn them off. Turn them on, turn them off, or ensure that you, before you start your testing, you just take snapshots and bring them up and make sure they work in an isolated environment. Azure gives you the ability to do that so quickly. It's just foolish to not do that. Isolated because you don't want any of that reaching back to on-prem. When you fail over into that environment, it's super simple inside of Azure Site Recovery. You just click test failover, pick the RGs we want to go into, and start running. If it comes up as we expect it's going to come up, everything will work just fine. If it doesn't, you'll start to see the errors and where things need to communicate. It's either I forgot a common service that has to be there, or I forgot some other service that needs to be migrated with this one at the same time. And then continue, rinse, lather, repeat to see how you got it. During this process, though, make a document that essentially is your playbook for the final migration. And this should already be something you can have templatized and save it for each migration, but look at it and say, this is all the things I'm going to do. Who am I going to notify? The process I'm going to run through. If I note that there's something wrong, scratch it out, write it again until it's right. And then we migrate. So you bring everybody together on the migration day, you have some open bridge, you keep everybody together and execute your plan. Make sure that any change control stuff obviously is in place, that your production environment is working up and ready. That's the biggest problem we find is, oh yeah, I forgot to open a change control ticket. I forgot to do this, I forgot to do that. Always take care of that stuff. Migrate the applications, smoke test it, make sure that they work. Have your users run through their test scripts, make sure everything's okay. You probably have some downtime in some of this because you want to make sure that they're okay. So even though the failover may take a couple of minutes coming up inside of Azure, you're not going to want to let people into that system until you're absolutely sure it came up okay. And then celebrate. That's the easiest part. The validate piece of this is that I like to say no plan survives contact with the enemy. So when I start out with a plan and then I actually execute it, even in migration day, something could go wrong. You could have some change that happened that wasn't tracked. We could have overlooked something. We could have not updated the document. Just be prepared for that sort of stuff. Murphy's Law is the same deal. The way to mitigate some of that though is to start with smaller chunks, things that are not super visible. Again, look at the confidence level that you have in these VMs, so that when problems do arise, management doesn't get all freaked out and be like, oh my God, this one didn't go right. It was so expensive. So high vis, start small, get them comfortable so that when you say, hey, I'm migrating an app again, oops, we had a hiccup. They're like, they don't care as much. And I can't really stress this enough, but do spend some time with testing plans. Going back to the apps, ensuring that the people who are responsible, who have the checkoffs, who have the ability to say yes or no, this is working right, know what working right looks like, okay? And they've signed off on it, because that, you, as an IT person, kind of backs you up. So with that, those are my lessons learned. I've got some slides we can jump into, which like the latter half of this is probably like 12 more slides, just straight up content, stuck from Ignite. Are there any questions so far? No, you guys are an easy crowd tonight, man. They're sweating it up here. All right, so.
You're intimidating, John.
What's that?
You're intimidating.
I'm intimidated. Glasses, man, you know? I go and get these glasses. I told my wife, I said, I want to get some glasses now because I need them, but I need to get the glasses that make me look like a smart enough in the room, you know? It's like, people are like, hey, this guy knows what he's talking about. Some things that, you know, if you haven't worked in Azure before, it's just super simple to get started with from a common services environment. You know, start with a VNet. And this is just, you know, this is not a best practice. This is just the getting started, right? You could do this however you want to. /16 is the root VNet. A lot of planning goes into this. The company that came to me and said, hey, we do this in AWS. How do we do it in Azure? And they had everything nailed down, and they're actually using a VNet. As I said, a VNet. They were some basically layover virtual networking on top of Azure, because Azure's native virtual peering links, you can only do 50. They reached some limit and they needed thousands. So they created essentially another virtual network on top of what Azure had. So they use an IPAM tool to deploy all that sort of stuff and manage it. Network security groups can solve most of your problems in terms of controlling traffic flow. You may not need to have firewalls in place in certain spots. Depends on your app. Those can be there. How you get to Azure is a big thing. A lot of people opt for the VPN. It's super fast, super inexpensive way to get there. You can also do the over the public internet type deal, but again, that's not as fast. ExpressRoute, just if you want to do ExpressRoute, plan 6 to 9 months. 6 to 9 months before you get an ExpressRoute up and running. Simply because it's a coordination of people. And I don't know why, you know, it's not as easy. I just sat on one just yesterday that, you know, we are responsible for the Azure piece of this. And I have I basically showed the Azure screen in the Skype call saying, this is what I see. These are the questions that you've asked. These are all the answers that I have for it. I can't give you anything else. So if you're the provider or you're the cross-connect guy or the on-prem guy, gain your answers from this. And if some configuration is wrong, look at your configuration compared to what Microsoft has. Turns out the guy was using the Microsoft side address as his address in BGP. So the BGP connection would never start. He's like, well, I'm using .6. Why can't I use .6 on-prem? Well, because the Microsoft side picked the .6. I can't tell you how that did that or why it did that or if that's always going to be the way it does when you bring up the circuit. But you can't use .6, pick .5. You know? And well, it worked. 2.5 hours. We were looking at that. And he's like, everything's right. But that's why it takes forever to get done. Domain controllers still necessary inside of Azure. If you got any Windows servers that are out there, you're going to want to bring a domain controller up into Azure. When you put VMs up there, you don't want them traversing your pipe because you pay for egress cost. Everything will resolve all that inside of Azure. That traffic will stay there. It only truly bring out of Azure what needs to be brought out of Azure. You don't want to have all that cross traffic communication there. AD Connect, that's really getting you set up in Azure AD and making sure that works. Proof of concept and testing. Again, build a sandbox, separate subscription, helps you out, starts playing with stuff like ARM templates. This is really the key to that, right? Don't reinvent the wheel. There are, I don't know, 1,000 or more Azure quick start templates on how to do something. I want to go and build a 4-node SQL always on cluster in Azure. Boom. There's an ARM template and a script to do that. Now, again, they say it's not production ready, but it shows you how to do that. So you can grab that, tweak, test, refine, rinse, lather, repeat until you're ready to go. If you're a no GUI, no DUI guy like myself, the portal does just about everything you want it to do, right? But really, if you learn Azure CLI, you'll be so much better off in terms of getting stuff done faster, saving things out like that. All right, so monitoring or in governance, right? This is Microsoft's talk about how we do things on-prem, right? If you move too fast, but you don't have control, you get overgrowth. If you have too much control, you don't move very fast, right? You got to find that right balance of being able to ensure that people are doing what you want them to do, giving them the freedom to do what they want to do, but stay within the guardrails. Don't move outside my guardrails, otherwise you have a bunch of disaster. And the way that Microsoft does this is through Azure Blueprints and the governance, right? This is a new feature that started, I don't know, mid last year, maybe beginning of 2017, I think. But essentially, it's a declarative JSON template that combines ARM templates, RBAC controls inside of Azure Active Directory, and then policies, which are declarative statements of what you can and can't do, or what you need to ensure exists in your environment. So policies are great because they allow you to go out and you can deploy a policy across the entire subscription and says, hey, if I deployed a policy that said no one could deploy an M-series virtual machine, would I get any hits? And if you do, well, there you know, you're going to find out who's using that and why they're using that. It's a good way to discover that stuff. So it brings up these audit alerts and saying, hey, somebody's doing something. If you go and enforce a policy, you can actually control something that has been deployed out of policy and remediate it into policy. So you can change your virtual machine sizes. You can change tags that have or have not been applied to certain items in certain places. With blueprints, you can go and ensure that particular rights and particular rights inside of Azure is set. Right now, when we get into a project, basically we're involved as contributors of the entire subscription. That helps us get where we need to go. When we're done, they take us out. But as a general rule, you don't want to give somebody contributor access to the subscription, because that gives them access to everything. Doesn't give them the rights to change it, but they can toast whatever they want. Assigning contributor rights to resources inside a resource group might be the best option, or just contributor rights to a resource group might be the best option. A blueprint will help you define that. It also gives you the ability to set up management groups. You can apply a blueprint to a management group, policies to subscriptions, and how this lays out gives you a very nice hierarchy. Essentially, it's group policy for the cloud without all the nasty group policy problems that you have. It's a global service inside of Azure. It's backed by Cosmos DB, so it's always available. It's absolutely free. And I use this term on the other side here, the cloud custodian, right? These are the terms you want to start using with your organization when you develop the team of people that are working for you or working in this environment. Call them the cloud architects, call them the cloud custodians, cloud engineers, formulate a cloud team. Set them apart from the people that are doing the on-prem stuff, because you want to show from an organization standpoint that you're moving that way, and then from an organization standpoint, help bring the people from the IT side over, as they come. When you bring them to the cloud, if you're decentralized IT, all those guys become cloud engineers. They stop doing the ITIL processes that are done on-prem and start doing the way things are done in the cloud, right? This is what they look like. Basically, a JSON template ugliness, but at least there's a format you can go. And there's a bunch of samples for this from the policy standpoint. Policies then go into groups of the blueprint area, and then management groups, again, showing you how they go together. This Azure Resource Graph is just a surfacing of what the Azure backend, the managers like Microsoft, what they would see. This is surfacing it to you now, how to query stuff against your environment. So the Resource Graph will probably become more popular in the next year or so, being able to run queries against that and see things in a more granular way. Azure Monitor. So native to Azure, obviously, it's a monitoring tool that allows you to actually look at your resources. It's getting better and better over time. If anybody who followed the Microsoft story for a while, they had this thing called System Center Advisor, which became OMS, which became Log Analytics, which became a bunch of stuff. And then they've broken it all up, and now it's become Azure Monitor, Azure Security, and whatnot. It's a very scalable, very flexible environment for querying log data and metrics. So it basically pulls all the telemetry from your virtual machines, as well as any logs you want to ingest into them. So you can then start querying across the entire environment. Say I'm a security guy and I'm looking for security events at a particular time and day. How many systems were affected by what I thought was possibly, an intrusion? right? I can get these queries out of Azure Monitor and that data. It's integrated with a bunch of different stuff from ISV's perspective. The nice thing about it, if I could show you, but whenever I jump into a new project now, I create Azure dashboards like instantaneously. I'll start creating a new dashboard and play with it for the entire project so I can see what I'd want to see if I were managing this. And then when I'm done I share it with the team and everybody sees it. It's got drill downs into the queries that I've worked on and everything from them. Great stuff, easy to manage, don't have to install a thing. This is how it sets up in terms of an architecture perspective. The backend, if you're ever familiar with Application Insights, really powers the backend for Azure Monitor. Develops, your common alerting environment, works on things like auto scale. So when if I have app services that need to scale out, I can generate monitor queries that will fire alerts and turn things on, completely software defined environment. So that's the architecture for Azure Monitor. Securing the environment, right? So look at your, again, think about it as a data center. Don't deploy virtual machines with public IPs unless you absolutely have to. Really, we'd only do that for like jump boxes or bash in boxes, which aren't connected to the domain, but they may be on the VNet. They go through a particular route. We have some creative ways. I've worked with Chris on some stuff where we set up like a load balancer in front to provide a public IP to everything, and then direct rules on the back end for things like HTTP and that sort of stuff. So we can control internet access for this one particular customer. So it would go out and pull stuff in from the internet through the load balancer, but not go across the pipe and then go out to the internet, right? So we can control traffic that way. Yeah. Let's see. These are all the individual things that you can use from a security standpoint inside of Azure, right? Anti-malware comes across in every single image for Windows now, so you've got a built-in antivirus. If you need a place to store credentials and keys that you don't want humans to manage, you want applications managed, Key Vault's great for that. Your standard, application layer 7 firewalls, that sort of stuff you can do. They've got DDoS protection, which is basically built into the environment. All of the stuff before you even get to your environment has to pass through several walls inside of Microsoft. You can pay for more DDoS protection if you want to. Again, that wouldn't be there if they wouldn't make you do that. And it's all backed by Azure Active Directory. How many of you right now have Azure Active Directory as like your standard logon? Okay. So you can use that stuff. Azure Firewall is a new service that is just recently been made popular. It's essentially a PaaS firewall service. I'm throwing it up here because it's an option. What I've heard from people is it's the most expensive option. It's based on their way that they bill it. But again, it takes you from having to set up a network virtual appliance and manage that license and that sort of stuff. So you got to weigh the cost yourself. But basically, it's based on the amount of ingress traffic and the number of hours that it runs, right? And that's it. There's only one SKU, whatever it processes. But there's a firewall, and you can place it in certain spots inside your network. All right, and that's it. The last part of the slide basically shows you where I got most of my information from. These are the sessions I stole slides from, some of the content, and the Bing search that I use that basically fires up a lot of this stuff, gives you more of the idea. A lot of the stuff, is not new. I'm kind of standing on, my experience, which has been the same for what these other people have posted on the internet. Probably migrate to the cloud. Again, 2011 is when Gartner came out with 5 Rs. 8 years later is a lifetime. Customers are really familiar with Azure. Some of you already run, so I'm probably not telling you anything you don't already know. Yeah. But it's been a pleasure to talk to y'all tonight. I'm glad you came to our initial kickoff again for the CLAM group. Let's see, are we all here? Everybody's, so only Ryan left, and we've got these names. Everybody signed the sheet, right? Sign the sheet? Okay.
So while he's signing and while he's generating a random number, we are going to be doing these CLAM meetings, Chicago Loop Azure Meetup. We're going to be doing them once a month. As our target, the next 3 are already scheduled, so take a look and say you're going to join. If you want to present, you have an idea that you want to talk to us about, we'd love to have it. Everybody's welcome. It's the Chicago Loop Azure Meetup, not the 10th magnitude Azure Meetup.
Yep.
We're in the spirit of continuous improvement. We threw this together. It looks like it works based off the people who showed up. So we'll be sending out surveys for feedback. We want the community to steer what we try to pull together as far as technology presentations, people we have in, as well as what we'll commit to you guys is we'll just continuously tune this based off of the direction that you guys give us. So thanks for coming, and hope you had a good time. And with that, John, don't count Lou.
I'm not, I didn't.
It's okay.
Thanks for hosting.
Yeah, you're welcome.